This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new segment of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Welcome, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Well, we're getting closer and closer, Maura, to the governor's election.
We are.
As the
campaign season in full swing.
And fall's here. I can't believe it. Are you getting a sense of how the governor's race is developing?
Well, I think everybody is. I think it's going to be quite a challenging fall for the governor, according to the polls, but we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Well,
as they say, the most important poll occurs on Election Day.
It's very profound, and you're absolutely right.
I heard that somewhere.
We have the best person, one of the best persons in the state to talk about this, Maura, and that is Brad Bumstead, veteran reporter for the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Charlie.
Well, it's nice to have you back. We've wondered how your book sales are going. Your book about Pennsylvania government that we talked about before, how's that going?
It's doing really well. I think the ebook sales are now picking up. Did really well in this part of the state where people are really focused on state government, and in the western part of the state where there's always been an interest in that. In Philadelphia, it's been a black hole sometimes, but other than that, you know.
And the name of your book again is
Keystone Corruption. Yes.
Okay.
You should probably be about ready to start the second version of Keystone Corruption.
Well, I am working on a second,
because there's been a lot that's been going on.
It has.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good time to mention it. As the holidays are coming, it makes a great gift to your friends and relatives.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome, Brad. Brad, there's no shortage of stories to talk about here in Harrisburg. Well, first is, of course, the governor's race. It looked like Mr. Wolf's, former Revenue Secretary Wolf, was way out in the lead, and that lead seems to have shrunk over time, depending on which polls you look at. The governor is thinking that maybe the cycle will work for him, that there's 8 years of Democratic control, 8 years of Republican control, 8 years of Democratic control, 8 years of Republican control. What's the governor's race looking like to you?
Well, if you walk right up the street here to the state capitol and ask 10 people, 9 of them will tell you that Wolf is running away with this. And at this point, I think it's fair to conclude that a lot of the polls show that, over 20 points. I think it'll tighten up as it gets closer to the fall, but I don't think it'll be a really narrow difference. But I think this idea that Wolf will win by 22, 24, 25 points, I'm not sure that that's in the cards. The last governor to do that was Republican Governor Tom Ridge in his race against Ivan Itkin, sort of an unknown Democratic House leader, and that was a 26-point margin. So whether Tom Wolf can be in that territory or not, I don't know. Capitol Wire, which is, of course, a subscriber-based publication at the Capitol, one of their reporters, Kevin Zwick, wrote an analysis this week that I thought was right on, and that is that people have decided that Wolf is okay, that he's just an acceptable alternative. And what the race really is about is they don't like Corbett. That's...
So if it's a referendum on Corbett.
It is a referendum on Corbett. And that I don't think they know a lot about Wolf, other than he seems like a nice guy who says education funding's been cut by $1 billion, and he tax the heck out of Marcellus shale industry, which Corbett has refused to do, but they think he seems okay because he's smart and he's a businessman. So.
If it's a referendum in Corbett, hasn't Corbett done what he said that he would do? He said he'd come and he would lower the unemployment rate, that he'd create jobs, that he wouldn't raise the personal income tax, that Pennsylvania would be better off. Aren't those things in the works?
He's largely done the things that he said, but he also signed a gas tax bill. You can't really call it anything else, after saying he wouldn't raise taxes at all. They would dispute that, saying that's just a free market adjustment, in the cap. But in any case, he's done a lot of the things that he said. But I think what happens is voters, look at the last administration with Governor Rendell and the spending and the taxes, and they say, we want something different. And Tom Corbett was promising something different, so they elected him. Then he did some of the things that he said he was going to do, and they didn't like it. And, I'm afraid that Mr. Wolf could run into a situation where he gets elected, people think he's okay, and he comes in, and if he has to raise taxes, which he may have to do because we're looking at a potential $2 billion deficit next year, they won't like him either. So.
Well, you brought up education, and that
Yes.
the education funding issue seems to be one of the biggest targets, at least for the advertisements
Oh, yes.
and the commercials right now. And I was reading a little bit that basically said both sides are right. And I don't know if you've looked into
Yes.
both sides, but it seems that both sides are making valid points. Do you think that makes it a wash, and that that issue will just go down party lines and not really be the big issue of the campaign?
Governor Corbett can only hope so. But the points that he's making now should have been made over the past 3.5 years. And the problem is that the impression was made on voters, in his first 6 months in office and subsequent to that he cut $1 billion from education. Now, he would say he just didn't replace federal stimulus money, and that overall the spend on education is higher now than it ever was. And I think that's true, too. But, he did go in and want to cut education. Higher education in particular took some real hits. And the public relations of the governor in the first 6 months when he did his first budget was almost non-existent on this issue. And it wasn't until July of 2011 that one of his PR people called me up and said, hey, we shouldn't be saying, it wasn't so much my story, but somebody else at your paper saying that the governor cut $1 billion from education. I said, you're telling me now? Like why weren't you guys talking about this back in March and April?
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's get to the good stuff.
Yes.
Okay. Pornographic images, jokes, cartoons, and other private messages. That's the list of what we're hearing is potentially coming out of the Attorney General's office, and the focus of a great some court action right now. This is really something behind the headlines. What is going on? Is this potentially devastating to anybody?
It's potentially explosive, let's put it that way. We don't know how it's going to turn out. It's also potentially a dud. This could get locked up in the courts forever because it's currently right now before a grand jury as this show is being filmed, and grand juries are secret. Someone took this to a grand jury. They took a right-to-know law request to a grand jury. And I've never heard of anything like that. I have a right-to-know law request pending with the Attorney General to get these emails from. They're largely during the Corbett administration when he was Attorney General, someone into Linda Kelly's tenure. Both Corbett and Linda Kelly say absolutely they did not know about any sexually explicit emails sent among staffers, prosecutors. Corbett's gone so far as to say that these are just rumors and he doesn't even know if they exist. But I have talked to people who say they did, and that's why I filed a right-to-know law request. And we'll just have to see. But, we just don't know how this one's going to turn out.
So this is oddly all related to the Sandusky case, correct? Where the emails were uncovered.
Yeah.
Yeah, during that time frame, during the investigation.
Right. There were 20 million emails deleted in the Attorney General's office under their shortened email retention policy. And when Jeffrey Moulton was hired by Kathleen Kane, the current Attorney General, and Moulton is a Widener Law School professor and former federal prosecutor. When he was hired to come in and do a report on how Corbett had handled the Sandusky investigation, they had these emails reconstructed, 20 million of them. And when Moulton went through those, he found these allegedly explicit emails with pornographic images. And that's what I have requested under the right-to-know law, and that's what's pending before a grand jury. We don't know who took it before a grand jury. We know the name of the judge. At first, it was difficult to even learn that. As an attorney, how things get locked down in grand juries.
Yeah.
Now, these pornographic images were not directly related to the Sandusky case.
They were not, and that's a great question. That's confusing. A lot of people think that it was because of this nexus with the Sandusky emails, but they're not about that. Yeah. This was more
part of the investigation.
As the insiders there would have said, might say, to relieve stress, they were sending this stuff around, that it was largely intended as jokes, but perhaps it got out of hand.
Okay, you may not be able to ask this, but I'm going to ask you anyways. How did you get wind of this? That prompted you to file a right-to-know claim?
Easy. Sources.
Sources. But you're not going to tell me what sources.
No,
are
I'm
you?
not.
Okay. I respect that.
You can keep asking as much as you want.
Okay. But you did get information from sources that made you go down that road.
Sure.
Okay.
And I have to test my hearing. Did you say, my ears heard you say 20 million?
Yes.
20 million.
That's correct. It was even higher than that. I believe it was 24 million, but I just rounded off at 20.
Rounded down.
It's
Yeah,
mind-boggling to
round
think
down.
how long it takes, how much time is wasted constructing 20 million
Months.
emails that are completely unrelated to state business.
Well, and especially if you look at what Moulton's conclusions were. I mean, here's a special deputy hired by Kathleen Kane who contended during her 2012 campaign that there was probably political shenanigans by the governor to delay the Sandusky case to get past his gubernatorial election. Moulton comes in, does the report for her, and he found that there wasn't. He found no evidence of any
So
foot
now I think we
dragging.
can say he did a thorough review if he went through 24 million.
20 million. 20 million.
20 million.
Well,
20
rounding
million.
down.
See,
Rounded
the numbers get away from us.
It was 33 million. Now it was just over 20 million emails.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, Brad, the interesting thing is shaping up around the country, it looks like it's going to be a disastrous midterm election for the Democratic Party. And you think that this is largely a referendum on the president and on his administration and their inconsistent performance. But yet here in Pennsylvania, you don't think that the Governor Corbett will benefit from that perhaps Republican tidal wave that's going to go across the country?
I think he will benefit some from that, but Pennsylvanians are notorious for splitting their tickets, so you could have a referendum on Obama and a referendum on Corbett at the same time. But he potentially could benefit from that, and the scenario for Corbett to come from behind and win and prove the polls wrong would be, a huge factor there with dissatisfaction with the Democrats nationally, and some turnout in the T and other places that helps Corbett. Corbett's problem, though, with the T is the Sandusky case. No matter what Jeffrey Moulton found, there are plenty of Penn State fans and enthusiasts who believe that he mishandled that in many, many ways and hold it against him, whether that's true or not.
Oh, before we run out of time, one of the other big issues you've been on top of has been the Department of Education. And there, again, we're tied back to Ron Tamales, email, Sandusky. It's all very incestuous, it seems. But what are you hearing there? What are you finding? Is this going to keep going as an issue?
I think it is, because just the other day, Auditor General Eugene DePasquale said he's going to audit the Department of Education's special advisors, not just in this administration, but in past ones, these people who get these special deals, sometimes after their employment, that they can remain on the job with the same salary and get pension benefits as Mr. Tamales did. For a 15-month period after he was Education Secretary, he retained his $139,000 salary, and got a pension bump as a result of that. Just resigned in August. It became a campaign issue. The Democrats were saying he was a ghost employee. Mike Fulmer, the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, told me he's convinced that he was not. The record showed that he wasn't. Whether he was or he wasn't, the connection to the Sandusky case, not that Mr. Tamales had anything to do with Jerry Sandusky or his crimes, not by a long shot, but the connection is that as Governor Corbett's appointee as Education Secretary, he also served on the Board of Trustees of Penn State and was there in the aftermath of the Sandusky arrest. And as a result, he would know everything that the governor was thinking and wanted done, both in the firing of Joe Paterno and the hiring of Louis Freeh and the Freeh Report. And these things are toxic to many Penn State people.
Okay, we want to thank you very much for being with us, Brad. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see what unfolds in the governor's race and have you back then.
Thank you.
We'll be back with another segment of Behind the Headlines right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. and by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions to make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States, and by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs.
Hi, welcome back to the second part of Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Maura and I are fortunate enough to have Dave Patty with us, who's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Business Council. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Thanks, good to be with you.
Well, we were just with Brad Bumstead, and we were talking about politics, and we were talking about the forthcoming elections, and I can't think of anyone better to continue the discussion with than with you. You follow these elections closely. What do you see coming up in the fall in the governor's race? Sure. Is the gap narrowing between former Secretary Wolf and Governor Corbett or not?
Well, it is, and of course that's getting all the attention. This is one of those short ballot years for Pennsylvania. We have the 203 state House seats up for election. 25 of the 50 state senators are 18 members of the U.S. House, but neither of our U.S. senators faces re-election. So the marquee race is really the governor's race. That's what it's all about. And that's the one that has the most speculation. The numbers have gotten tighter. You would expect that after a primary, the winner of the primary generally has a bounce and looks good in the polls, and then they close up. There's some discussion about some of the publicly available polls that are out there, whether or not their turnout model. This gets a little bit geeky and everything, but whether or not they are designing their methodology in a way that gives too much belief of too many Democrats will show up, not enough Republicans, or at least that the mix will be too heavily weighted to the Democrats. The Corbett internal polls that they talk about, and some of the publicly available polls, talk about a 7-point race. Now, still, that gives Mr. Wolf a lead, but a 7-point race is one that could change and could be overcome, especially when you think about 2 to 3% margin of error. So,
Well, we're heading into debate season now between the candidates. We've got a couple of those coming up, and so I wanted to ask you, if you were a moderator for one of these debates, what would be the one question you would want to ask both candidates?
Well, I think what you really want to get at as a moderator is beyond the fluff and the rhetoric to specifics of, give me your vision for Pennsylvania as you will leave it 4 years from now, and
or
how will you get there, or 8 years,
yeah.
but and how would you get there? Because I think it is fair to say of all candidates that they skim on the issues. Mr. Wolf has a 47-page paper if you want to download it from his website, but a lot of it is fairly innocuous pablum. I don't disagree with the things that are in there, but it actually does set out some nice goals, but it doesn't really tell us how we're going to get there, and how are you going to make trade-offs between some of those goals. And I think Governor Corbett needs to do the same thing. He has talked about still doing pensions. He has still talked about doing something on liquor. But we need to know, how do we get there?
That's unfinished business.
It's unfinished
You'd be more
business.
interested in what the projection.
Well, and what does it mean? Obviously, from my point of view, what does it mean for the business community and prosperity in Pennsylvania and job creation in Pennsylvania?
If you're Governor Corbett, are you frustrated? He came into office promising to do certain things, and a great number of those he has done. For example, the transportation infrastructure bill, for example, he was able to get that done. Sure. He's lowered unemployment. He's created jobs.
Well, in fact,
I guess if you're Governor Corbett, how do you deal with, what else? What else must I do to narrow this gap?
Right. They start doing a list of accomplishments during the administration. They're done some by statute, some by regulatory decisions, some by executive action. Just change the way they administer programs and paperwork requirements, and they're up to a 50-page list. So yes, it gets very, very frustrating. And it's interesting, some of the marquees that I don't think he gets enough credit for, and part of that comes from within his own party. You mentioned transportation. The transportation bill is something we lobbied very hard for, very much think was the right way to go. But there are arch conservatives who say, well, that was a gas tax increase. He was able to achieve some meaningful reforms in education. But there are conservatives and some from the left who don't like some of those reforms. And some of the ways that we're going with new academic standards or assessments. I think a huge success that got almost no press because it came out right before Labor Day was the Healthy Pennsylvania Initiative, a way to look at expanding through the Medicaid mechanism the provision of health care services to more people, but doing it with a private sector solution, essentially a health exchange, and gets the Obama administration to say yes. I mean, if Tom Corbett, if you would have predicted months ago, Tom Corbett gets Barack Obama to say yes to something,
it was not
no one would take that vote, right?
Yeah.
And yet it could be a national model. But then again, there are, again, I will say conservative voices that say, well, it's still an expansion of Medicaid, even though it's being done the right way. We don't like this an expansion. And so the administration doesn't trump some of those victories that I think play to the middle and play to independents and moderate voters, and for which the governor should get a great deal of credit for those successes, and that really are making Pennsylvania a more competitive place to do business and frankly, a better place to live.
Brad Bumstead made an interesting point when we were talking to him about this election being more of a referendum on Corbett than it is an election that will be overwhelmingly voting Tom Wolf into office. Do you have any sense of that? Or
well, I think that's the truth of any time there's a challenge race on an incumbent. Whether we look at some of the legislative races or in a gubernatorial race. We all know in 2006 it was a referendum on Rick Santorum. It was not about Bob Casey, and that's often the case. And in fact, the Republicans then 6 years later in 2012 tried to make it a referendum on Bob Casey. So I think that's the way you attack an incumbent, and I think that's true. And it shows in the polling. If you look at the polling, even the publicly available polling, it isn't that people love Tom Wolf. They like him. They find him trustworthy. But they're not necessarily swarming to him. In fact, Quinnipiac actually asked the question straight up, and most of them admit, no, I'm actually voting against Tom Corbett. And the difficult thing for Tom Corbett is that's also true among Republicans, that there are, even in the governor's own internals, his support within his own Republican ranks, within his own base, aren't what they should be. They're 70% or something, which is nice. But Tom Wolf's is 85-90% of Democrats saying they're going to vote for him. You always have to wonder about what is it within your own party if they decide not to vote for you or not to go to the polls. And that's what the governor is working on, is trying to bring his own base back in. The 7% is surmountable, 9% is surmountable, 10% is surmountable if Republicans vote for Tom Corbett.
Yeah.
And if Republicans aren't going to vote for Tom Corbett, he can't win.
Nearly impossible.
What do you foresee happening in the House and the Senate here in Pennsylvania? Any changes?
Right. Well, right now we have a large majority of Republicans in the House of Representatives, 111 to 92. We have a smaller majority, but a strong majority in the Senate. Given the combination of which seats are up in the Senate, candidate selection of the two parties, the way the demographics and reapportionment add up, I don't see any way. I think it's very, very difficult for Democrats to win a majority. They could
in either chamber.
Well, I was going to say the House is impossible. I mean, I can't write a scenario in which House Republicans lose 10 seats net. Some people will lose. I think there are retirements and redistricting, because this is the first time we're working with the new districts, where seats that were moved from one part of the state were moved to a new part of the state that were supposed to be a Democrat seat or supposed to be a Republican seat. I think there'll be some surprises among those. I think there'll be some takeaways on both sides in the open seats where there's no incumbent running. I don't know what the net change is, 2, 3, 4, something in that range. But I don't think there's any scenario in which the House Republicans aren't in the majority. And frankly, they could come out with even more, and Senate Republicans could come out with actually more than they have now. So if the gubernatorial race, is one in which Tom Wolf wins, we could probably see divided government for the next 4 years and probably some difficult times in getting statutory change.
Well, Governor Corbett's had some issues too, so some of his issues haven't gone through as well. Do you think we'll see any activity this fall in the General Assembly?
Well, I'm certainly very hopeful that they take up the cigarette tax that's been proposed as a way to help funding of the schools in Philadelphia. I mean, we have a crisis. That's not a great long-term solution, and there are all kinds of good arguments against a cigarette tax per se. It's regressive, it's easy to avoid by just going outside the city limits. All those things notwithstanding, it's what the city itself chose, and they're just asking to be empowered to do it. I'm inclined to give them the power to do that. We still have to clean up the education funding issue overall, which is the accountability for what do you do with the money you do get, how is it spent, do we get good results in education, but also we have to look at how it's distributed among the 500 school districts. Of course, that's the total package of how much money goes into education is a big issue within the gubernatorial campaign. Right. That's part of the question, but that's not the whole thing. We're not going to get to the whole thing. We're not going to get to pensions. And pensions, public pension reform, teacher pensions are driving the cost of education. And whether or not PSEA likes it, if how much I give you to give for salaries for teachers counts as part of education spending, then how much we give you from the state to local governments and school districts for pensions has to count as part of education spending. And until we get those pension payments under control, that's eating the rest of the education budget. But I don't think we see anything happening there. We're not going to see anything on liquor. Maybe a little work. I'd like to see could be a little bit of workers' comp reform, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I don't think we're going to see anything major. Yeah.
Do you think education is going to continue to be the big issue for this upcoming election, like it seems to be right now?
Well, I don't think jobs have completely gone away. People are saying, "Oh, it's all about education now." I think jobs are always the issue. It's always the economy, stupid.
Mm-hmm.
But
what are you calling stupid?
Education, education is certainly, education broadly speaking, not just funding, is very much in the minds of voters.
Okay.
Well, Dave, you may have given us a preview of what might happen if there is a Governor Wolf in our future and a Republican House and a Republican Senate. We've just begun to see divided government and gridlock, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, one of the cases that could be made for a Corbett re-election, I don't know that he's going to make this, but I'd very much fear that if we see a Governor Wolf, we will also see very much like Washington, where the House will not be giving him anything for the first 2 years. Next 2 years, he's in re-election mode, so he's not trying for anything, and we're 5 years away from actually doing anything for Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you for being with us today, Dave, and thanks for the preview. We will be with you again next week in a new edition of Behind the Headlines. We'll see you then.